Now we're ready to work on the rooftop, and we have a large piece that we cut to size when we were working on the interior structure, and then underneath the black medium weight chipboard under miscellaneous there are two rooftop railings, which I have cut right here. So to get started, we want to do a little preliminary work on this top piece. I want to cut a piece of black cardstock that will finish off the underneath, and I've got a piece prepped here just with some larger score tape around the end. So, and that's facing up. I think you can see that I wrote the word top here. So I'm going to trace this out. I'm just going to flip it to the back here, trace it out, and after I trace it out I'm going to cut inside of the line because I want that black cardstock to be slightly smaller than the shape. So I'll do that and then I'll be back. Now that I have my black cardstock shape cut out, I'm going to just set it aside for a few minutes. And then on this piece of chipboard, I just want to take my black marker and on the circular part and kind of come down about a matching part. It's no longer circular over here, but just about that same distance. I'm going to blacken in about 1/8 of an inch and then make sure I get that whole curve darkened. I'm going to come down here actually a little bit onto this part as well and come on the other side so that I have some nice ink coverage around that circular end down there. It's not necessary to do that on this other end. Next we'll add the magnets to this piece, and for that I'll bring in the castle. So here's the castle, and you may recall that we put a couple of magnets underneath this piece of cardstock up here, and I have their opposite side here, and they naturally want to seek out their partners. And so what I'll do here is put a couple of pieces of cardstock down there, and then I'll remove the backing on these magnets and set them on top. Now the magnets I'm using are self-adhesive on one side. If you don't have a self-adhesive ones, before we proceed you'll put a little drop of glossy accents or diamond glaze, something strong kind of adhesive like that on those tops of those two magnets. And then you'll want to look from above and get this piece put down. It will butt up against the tall tower over here, and it should match up with the curves on the large round tower. It also fits behind this ridge so that the magnets hold it in place on this end, and then these buildings hold it in place on the other sides. So I'm going to put some pressure over here on this side now so that my magnets get attached. And if you're using diamond glaze or glossy accents, after you put some pressure on here, you'll want to wait for that adhesive to set up before you pull this top off. So now I can just reach underneath these pieces of cardstock and kind of just quickly pull this straight up. I found with these strong magnets that you need a couple pieces of cardstock or a piece of chipboard in between the original sides and where you're putting these on. Otherwise they're just too strong and it'll try to pull these magnets right back off again when you lift it up. Now that we have our magnets on, I'm going to flip this over so that I'm looking at the top. And this is a piece of paper from the 6-inch pad. I'm going to use the 6-inch length and just line it up down here with the bottom and cut that off, and then use some good score tape coverage to put that on the top. So I put my paper on the top, and I'm just going to do a little inking around the edges. This may not show because of how we're putting the railings on, but possibly could, especially down here at this end where there's no railing. And I'll just give this raw chipboard a good inking down at this end as well. So now that we've put our decorative paper on the top of the roof, we can put it in position here. Make sure it's all aligned properly, and then we can see where we want to place our large tower roof. Now I'm going to put this seam so that it's kind of facing this edge of the turret. You can decide where it looks best to you. You know, there's going to be that seam somewhere. And then you just want to place it so that you have about even overhang all the way around. So just kind of look at it from all sides. I think it's going to be about, maybe not quite 1/4 of an inch going all around. So I'm just kind of turning it around and looking at all the sides. And when you get it where you want it to be, you'll just use some good wet glue on this part to attach the cone to it. So here's my wet glue. You can see I just put some Post-its there to kind of tell me where the cone is going to come on. But by using wet glue, you'll have an opportunity to adjust it when you put it down. And then when you're happy where it's located, just use some pressure to hold it in place for a few minutes till that glue sets up. Now we're ready to work on our 2 railings, and I've cut some decorative paper here. I've got 2 strips that are 1.25 inches wide by the length of the railing, and 2 strips that are 5/8 inch wide, which is the width of the railing. And so for each railing I'm going to use score tape and put the 5/8 inch side on one side, and then flip it over, and on the back I'll put the other strip, and I'll just use score tape on the chipboard itself, not on the decorative paper. So I'll go ahead and get those prepped. So now that I have both of these pieces of chipboard covered with decorative paper on both sides, I'm going to use my on the edge die, the torn notebook that we've been using on the project, and I'm going to put, one side has the 1.25 inch paper on it, and that's the side I'm going to place against the die. It's sized so that it should fit on the black foamy part of the die here, and then I'll just line up that top edge right with the top edge of where I can see it's going to cut on the die, just like we've done on the walls. And then I'll run both pieces through the die cutting machine. So here are the 2 pieces now that I've cut them with the die, and I've done some inking to get rid of the white edges and then used a little distress ink on them. And now we can size them to length. So here's our little roof unit to this point, and what we want to do is just see how long each one of these needs to be. What they do is they fit right on top of that edge, and then we're going to eventually wrap this tab around the bottom. And I'm just going to bring them up square to the edge. I'm not going to try to slant this edge or anything like that. but what you probably will want to do is not just butt one end up and cut off the other, is kind of see where the little uh, points of the die are. So you might want to take some off of one end and some off the other end. Now the one in the back will be longer. It almost takes up that whole length. So just be aware that they are two different sizes, and so cut them appropriately. So now I have my two railings cut to length, and I want to cut a 1/8 inch strip of chipboard to use as kind of a reinforcement behind here. Now you can try to cut a ledger strip in half. I don't usually have too much success with that. So this is just a piece of scrap chipboard that's longer than the longest piece here. I've put a little piece of score tape on the back, and I will anchor it down with a couple of my little pieces of blue tack, and then I will cut some 1/8 inch strips off of this. Now here are my two little 1/8 inch strips, and I'm just going to take my black marker and put black ink on the three sides that don't have score tape on them. And once you have your strips covered with black ink, we want to install them even with the edge of the railing on the back side, so that they'll go in right like this, and then just cut them to length. And then if you think this plain black edge will bother you, you can always take a couple pieces of our little trim and put it on there. I think it's fine, and especially because this is, if I did that, it would be like checkers against checkers here, and I don't think it's necessary, but suit yourself. Next, we want to create a little channel for the edge of this chipboard to fit into. I'm just taking the scrap that I had left over from cutting my little 1/8 inch ledger strips here, but any piece of straight chipboard, so the bend is not on this side, that's as long as these will work. And what you want to do is just bump it right up against that edge that we just put in, and use your bone folder. You can start this by just kind of bringing it gently up with your finger, and then use your bone folder so that you may end up making a channel that's the width of the chipboard there. So I'll just run my bone folder back and forth a couple of times, and you can always take that off and crease it, and I'll repeat that for the other side. So now on each of these railings there's a nice little 1/16 inch channel between the bottom of the railing and where this tab folds up. And on that tab we'll put some 3/8 of an inch score tape like I've done on this one, and then just kind of angle back these edges a little bit on both sides, so you have kind of an angled ends. So I'll repeat that on the other one. So to install these, we'll run some glue down in that channel. I've kind of bent this tab back a little bit so that I'm going to remove the tape backing, but I don't want to engage it prematurely. And then I'll watch my end alignment here, and then get that put in all the way into the channel so I can feel it seated properly. And once I feel that, then I'll go ahead and attach my bottom tab. So I have one inside installed here. Make sure it's staying plumb and perpendicular to the bottom here. And then go ahead and install the other side the same way. So I'm just using a couple of my dies that I had out for the project to ensure that my railings are staying nice and straight and plumb, and then I'll let that dry thoroughly. So now that the glue on our railings has dried, we can go ahead and finish off this bottom. I'll just do a little test fit here. I want to make sure that I can see just a little peek through of green on these two sides, and if I can't, I'll trim off the edge just a little bit so I can. Now this one gets installed with this edge down here all the way or close to the end, and then I have just put some more score tape around these edges here, and before I adhere it, I'll just make a little ring of glue around each of my magnets, and then I will adhere this piece of cardstock down. So here's our completed rooftop piece, nicely finished on the inside. And we'll put it on the castle next. So there's what the rooftop looks like installed. And I want to add a couple little doors over here on the tall tower. And to do that, I'm going to take the, this is the window template for the tall tower, but I only want to have 2 doors. So this is the pedestal door spacing, which has 2 notches, and I'm just going to center that on there so that we don't have to have another template. And then I can use that as a guide for the placement of my 2 doors, making sure that they don't come any lower than the top of our rooftop piece. So there are the 2 doors installed on the tall tower. We'll start our final assembly by putting the roofs on the courtyard towers. Now when you put these on, I like to work at eye level and turn them around so that I make sure that everything gets placed equidistant and it's all staying very level. So I'm just going to use wet glue, big blob of wet glue here, which will allow me to a few seconds for positioning and to get the tower roof on the way I want it. I thought you might be interested in to see how I get my projects up to eye level. This is just a simple open box made from 1x10 pine. It's just held together with some screws, and you can see it has 2 sides here so that I can adjust the height of it by putting it on one side or the other. And then to go on top of that, I have a piece of, this is just melamine, it could be, it's like hardboard, 1/8 inch masonite, and then I just taped a spinner to the bottom of it, and that way if I put this on top of my box I just showed you, I can easily move the project all around to see whatever angle I need to work from. So that's just how I work on it. So I'll use my setup I just showed you so that I can make sure I get all of these roofs on straight when I put them on, and I'll go ahead and put all of the roofs on now. When I put the front tower ones on, I'll make sure that this seam goes towards, pointing kind of diagonally inwards. The small tower roofs, I'll put that seam probably going kind of, just a little bit off center, I think, so that you won't see that seam from the front. These square towers, whatever side suits you. And yeah, and then the tall tower roof. So I'll go ahead and get all of those roofs put on, and then I'll be back. So I have a corner roof here on the front that for whatever reason isn't sitting straight, and so I've just cut a little shim here from some lightweight chipboard that I'll put over here on the side that needs to be raised up a little bit. And then I'll put a little more glue on that. And that should do the trick. Once the other roofs are dry, you can take the courtyard towers and put them in. Now, it's a really, these corners right here are going to bump up against each other, but they will just fit if you push the courtyard tower all the way towards this railing, and it will probably have to come pretty close to the edge of the pedestal as well. So go ahead and glue those in just by adding some wet glue to the bottom of the tower. And then once you have those courtyard towers in position, just hold some pressure on them for a few minutes till they set up. And I took one last look around the project, and I decided to add this element from the chipboard pieces. I just put a red brad in there at the top, and I'll use some wet glue to put that on. And I think that will finish up the project. I hope you have enjoyed building this project, or just seeing how it all came together. This is April with Craft Knife Chronicles. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.